Welcome back to the Fourth Wall Podcast. This is a very special episode. We've actually been on hiatus for a few weeks here now, and we thought we would take a look back at some of the best and worst movies of the summer. Zach, overall, how do you think the summer of movies went this year?
I'd say this summer, movies, this is probably like kind of an average summer. There's not that many big, huge hits that everybody loves. I'd say the biggest standout for the summer is obviously Endgame, with all the money it made, and a lot of people liked it. But I also think John Wick might be the best summer blockbuster movie. Made a lot of money. Critics liked it. Audience scores are high. So I think like that's the main good movie takeaway from 2019 of the summer movies.
I would agree with you. I mean, I think John Wick, maybe it was big for a little bit, but it kind of lost steam and nobody's really talking about it anymore. Maybe some of the shows that are coming out will revive some of that John Wick buzz. But the only thing I've really been hearing people talking about this summer is the Marvel movies and these Disney live action remakes.
Well, comparing that to John Wick, like there's only one John Wick, and then there's a bunch of these live action remakes, and there's a bunch of the Marvel movies, Spider-Man, Endgame. Look at any of these movies. Like Aladdin, was anybody talking about Aladdin for more than a week or two? I feel like John Wick, it stayed in the headlines for a good week, and then it continued to make money and people were talking about it. So I say, compared to all the other movies coming out this summer, it was in the headlines just as long as most of them, with the Endgame being the exception. If I was making a portfolio for this summer, I'd put John Wick in there before a lot of these other movies that have come out. What do you think of the whole, though, speaking of live action, like what do you think of live action movies? Like, is this a thing that they're going to start doing, or are they going to stop doing this?
Well, eventually they will exhaust their list of movies that they can make into live action movies. You know, Lion King, the critics didn't like this movie. It's pretty low rated at this point because it's an exact copy of the Lion King animated movie. And so maybe they've learned their lesson at this point. It's been like, okay, well, we can't make an exact copy. Or maybe they haven't learned their lesson because Lion King is already performing well at the box office. There's only a few left, I think, that you can remake. They might get into like some of the JV movies like Fox and the Hound and some of those other ones that aren't known as huge classics as Aladdin and Lion King and things like that. But yes, they will ride this train as long as audiences keep showing up.
Yeah, the one thing though I've heard about these live action movies is they're not that like good for kids. Like I feel like Disney's main market is a good movie to kind of babysit your kids with. And so with these new live action ones, they're not cartoons. They're not just like colors, like it looks real. So it's not as engaging for the kids. These are kind of like nostalgic movies for like adults. I think in the future, they might go to something more animated. I don't think the audiences will like this live action, completely CGI formula as much in the future.
Yeah, you're right. I think they could introduce a little bit of more stylized animation to make it feel a little bit more imaginary. You know, because folks said like Lion King is creepy.
I was going to take my 2-year-old nephew. I was going to take him to see a movie this weekend. And the choices were either Toy Story 4 or Lion King. And like me and my family like watched a trailer for Lion King. And like those lions are like super scary. So yeah, I don't even think it's like totally a kid's movie. So we did go to see Toy Story 4. Other stuff from this summer, Men in Black made no money. That was a dud. I didn't see it, but I didn't hear good things. Aladdin, semi-dud. And then what do we have left to look forward to this summer?
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino's movie. I'm definitely looking forward to that. It's his first movie not with the Weinsteins, so that will be interesting. That's about it, right? I mean, we have Hobbs and Shaw coming up, the Fast and the Furious spinoff, but that will close out the summer as far as these summer blockbuster movies. And it's been a little bit of a disappointing summer.
Yeah, maybe disappointing is a good word, but there were some other, like there was a cool movie that came out recently, Midsommar. I know you saw that.
Yes, Ari Aster's new movie. He's coming off of Hereditary, so I was definitely looking forward to seeing what he would do. What did you think of it?
Well, I really liked Hereditary, and knowing that this guy wrote and directed both of them, I was super excited to see Midsommar. I was like looking at some headlines about it, and everybody was saying like how like messed up and crazy and just weird and horrific it was. And I didn't think it was too bad as far as that. If I were to say Hereditary is a Catholic horror movie, there's like kind of like demonic references and stuff, then Midsommar is kind of a pagan suspense art film. What it's about is there's a group of university students, and they go with their one of their friends is from Sweden, and then they go to his hometown for a festival during their summer break.
Christian says you've got this special week planned.
It's sort of a crazy festival. Special ceremonies and dressing up.
That sounds fun.
And the Swedish guy they're friends with is from like a small rural town in northern Sweden, and it's remote and self-sufficient. It's this little village. It kind of reminds you of like an Amish village in the USA. And once they get to this place, things start to get pretty weird.
It does get a little crazy. I feel like the whole thing is sort of predictable, though. Like, did you feel like you kind of knew what was coming the whole time? Like we'd seen this movie before?
Yeah, I mean, you could tell the whole time like things weren't, like bad things were happening, but I feel like this movie was just a matter of like how they would happen.
Yeah, you knew what was coming pretty much the whole time. It was suspenseful, though, as it was drawn out, and you were wondering, okay, are they actually going to do the thing? And then they do the thing. And then you move on to the next thing that could happen, and you're like, are they going to do it? And then, of course, they do it. I would say it was entertaining the whole time. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd say from the beginning to the end, kind of like Hereditary, you're just taken into just like this dark place. I feel like Ari Aster is like a super like troubled person, and it like really shows in his movies. And you're just like from beginning to end, you're kind of like trapped in this really apprehensive state. And so I was like curious the whole time, but I would say after seeing the movie, I was a little disappointed. I wouldn't even qualify it necessarily as like a horror movie. I would say, yeah, like I said, it's like a suspenseful pagan thriller.
Most horror movies, it starts out light and happy, right? A bunch of teenagers and they're joking around in the car and stuff. And then it goes to horrific as the movie progresses. And this movie was interesting because they flipped the script a little bit. So it starts out horrific. The opening sequence was good. I've heard some people say it wasn't needed, but I don't know. I thought it was good, and I thought it really gave you context for the rest of the story. So it starts out horrific and awful, and then actually for our main character, the story ends up in a place that's very happy. So it was a reverse of the normal horror formula, and I think that's what he was going for. But what did you think about that?
Yeah, I feel like that was interesting and everything, but it's still like just as a story itself, like I don't think it was that good. Like Hereditary, so many weird different things happen in this. I kind of felt like I was waiting for something like super weird or strange or scary to happen, and I don't know if it like I ever got that, but there were some great things about this movie though. Just the cinematography. You feel like you're up in northern Sweden in the mountains, so it's almost like a camping trip if you go on this movie. Even if you're not like a sound mixer or you don't know anything about editing movies like me, you just feel like the editing and the sound mixing is like so good for this. I thought it was a good movie, but not as good as Hereditary.
Yeah, it was definitely well done technically. Like, I feel like everything was on point. Cinematography, you were right about that. Sound mixing. And the critics are loving it. Jordan Peele, director of Get Out and Us, he said to Ari Aster, "I think you've made the most idyllic horror film of all time. You've taken Stepford Wives and shattered the attractiveness of that movie with this one. That alone is a feat." Also, there are some obvious comparisons out there, but this movie is just so unique. I would disagree with that. We'll get into that in a second. This hasn't existed yet, and anything after Midsommar is going to have to contend with it. I mean, this usurps The Wicker Man as the most iconic pagan movie ever to be referenced. He mentions Wicker Man, and I think he has to do that to explain what he's trying to say. But that's the movie that this is the most similar to. It's almost like a modern remake of Wicker Man.
Wait, what is Wicker Man? Like, when did it come out? Like, what? I don't know anything about Wicker Man.
Yeah, so it's a movie from the 70s. Basically, a guy goes to an island that has a cult, and it's the same sort of deal. He doesn't know whether or not they're good guys or bad guys, and things get out of hand and end up in a large bonfire. It was very similar. That being said, the movie does distinguish itself in some key areas from Wicker Man. The pacing, editing, cinematography, the stuff we've talked about was good. And I think it's a step up from Hereditary, which was already pretty good.
I think we both agree it's a solid movie from this summer. When we look back at this summer, it's going to be the summer of Endgame. And like we mentioned earlier, the Endgame has officially reached $2.79 billion at the time of recording this podcast. So it's the highest grossing film of all time.
And I feel like it has a little bit of an asterisk after that, too. The movie that's playing in theaters right now is not in its original release form. They re-released the movie with another scene, not in the main movie. It's another tacked on scene. So if I do give Endgame a little bit of credit, it's that Avatar made a lot more money because it was shown in 3D everywhere, and that was the big push, and 3D tickets were, much more expensive than your average movie ticket. Whereas Endgame, most of that money is in straight up $9.50 movie tickets. So I do have to give it some credit there.
Well, I guess since with all these re-releases and stuff, thanks a lot, Marvel, for making box office numbers useless. But speaking of re-releases and remakes, there's a new Top Gun movie coming out. Tom Cruise is a national treasure. Did you see the trailer for that, Cody?
I did see it. Yeah, there's not much there other than him, taking off in a jet.
And cool, flying F-16s flying. When I heard that they're making a new Top Gun movie, I thought they would have drones into the situation. There's these drones and everybody has to retire. All the pilots, we don't need pilots anymore. And then the drones malfunction somehow. And then Tom Cruise needs to get in the cockpit and then he saves the day. That's what I was thinking that's going to happen. But this trailer didn't really hint at that at all. It was mostly just volleyball players, fist pumping, and just planes flying around.
They could have hinted at that a little bit. You remember the end? A commanding officer is talking to Tom Cruise, and he's like, "Your kind is headed for extinction." And Tom Cruise is like,
"Maybe so, sir, but not today."
So that might be referencing, drones taking over the workload for warfare. I don't know. I just feel like we didn't get a good sense of what the story's going to be. It could be completely drone-centric. I think that might be an interesting angle, although we've seen that before in other movies. Tom Cruise, he's been playing the leading man for so long. I think it's hard for him to stop doing that. What I would like to see him do in this movie and in other Tom Cruise properties like Mission Impossible is start to move more towards the mentor role. He's not going to look like he does now for much longer.
So start being in more dramatic movies. Or do you want him to kind of retire like a Sylvester Stallone? Somebody else comes in. We have a new star.
Yeah, exactly. Like Michael B. Jordan in those Creed movies kind of, took the torch away from Sylvester Stallone. He needs to start doing that if he's going to keep getting roles. I mean, you can't keep playing the leading man into your 60s and 70s. We've gotten 30 years of that at this point. I want to see Tom Cruise helping the next cool dude become a cool dude.
Yeah, I could see Tom Cruise being a mentor guy. Or maybe he can make more movies like Eyes Wide Shut or Jerry Maguire. He'll probably be one of those Robert Redford guys, Al Pacino. He'll be acting, playing characters till he's in his late 90s or something. But with all these re-releases and stuff, I get now that we have all this technology, we have all these animated effects that, now that we have this, let's take the same story of a movie. It came out 25 years ago. It came out however long ago. But now we have these effects. And we're going to just take that and remake it. And that's going to be half of your movies in the future. Do you think this is a good thing?
I don't think it's a new thing. I think technology maybe isn't pushing this in one way or the other. It's kind of always been this way. There was the silent era where studios were putting out hundreds of movies per year. And then all of a sudden we got talkies in the early 30s, and they went back and remade a lot of the silent movies that were successful, and they remade them as talkies. A Star is Born that came out last year. That's the fourth time that movie has been made. It's not our generation necessarily that are remaking these movies. It's always been a thing.
A lot of these remakes and stuff are making a lot of money, but ticket sales are declining. And so I feel like movies, they're trying to figure out new ways to make movies, new ways to get money for their movies. The current model of a movie coming out in a movie theater and then waiting 4 to 6 months after, then you can rent it. Back when we had VHSs, I feel like that was necessary because, you had to create all the VHS tapes and then you had to distribute them. But now that there's such a big selection streaming, we don't need to go to the theaters. So maybe these new big movies that are coming out, maybe they could just go straight to us, right? You've mentioned this before.
Yeah, I do think the model of, going to a location to watch a movie is a little bit antiquated. It's the same reason why libraries aren't getting as much traffic these days. And I think, there's going to be a time when we can watch a movie that's in theaters at home right away. And, some people, they're like, oh, but I love the experience of going to the movies and all that. Just like some people like the experience of reading a real book or a real newspaper. But I don't think it's going to be the only option going forward. What I would love to see right now is an option to, pay something like $30 and watch a movie that's in theaters at home for the convenience of not having to get all dressed up, drive over to the movie theater, wait, and, find my theater, find a spot. People are talking. I think all of that will still be around. We still have paper newspapers. We still have paper books that people are printing, but I think there will be another option in the future. And I just hope that future's soon so that we don't have to get ourselves into the movie theaters to see some of these new movies. What we haven't seen on streaming yet are movies, over $100 million, these big blockbuster movies premiering on streaming. Netflix does put out Hallmark Channel sized movies on streaming right away. But I want to see, these big I want to see John Wick 4 from the comfort of my home on opening night.
And you think $30 is a good number?
It's a number that I threw out there. The reason why they don't do it right now is, number one, the movie theaters would be upset, of course, because it would be cannibalizing some of their business. But because also they don't know how many people are watching, right? So I think it has to be more expensive than going to the theater, where they really can keep track of how many people are paying to see this movie, $9.50 each. But I think if the price is high enough, it will be worth it. And also, these movie studios only get 20 to 30% of a ticket price. If Sony, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Disney had their own streaming services, I think they could take all of that $30, that one-time watch $30 price, as opposed to the $3-4 that they get from the sale of a ticket in a traditional movie theater.
I feel like there's people that would pay $100 if they could watch Endgame at home, or maybe $200, maybe $400.
It depends on the movie, yeah. And then they could start talking about early access. For $500, you can watch Endgame the night before it comes out. And they would get some people who paid to do that, I guarantee it. But until we live in a world where we can stream these movies, there's a vast collection of movies we haven't seen that we can watch for free or cheap.
One of the things we like to do in this show is we want to help people find hidden gems. We're all in that situation where we're looking for a movie, so we want to give you some ideas. We're out there watching these weird movies, and we want to be on the front lines telling you what to expect. So this week, in case you forgot, we have 2 movies to go over. I was to watch Bone Tomahawk, and this movie was 2015. So Cody, could you explain a little bit about Bone Tomahawk?
Bone Tomahawk is a Western / horror. And that's the reason why I wanted you to watch this movie, is because it was an interesting genre pairing. You don't see those two genres overlapping much, and when you do, it gets a little bit cheesy. But it is able to do it. Kurt Russell is sort of typecast in the role as the sheriff of a Wild West town, and there's this Native American tribe that's outside of the town, and they start being sort of antagonistic, and it's about how he handles that. Now, you are not a fan of movies that can be slow, so I'm curious, what did you think of Bone Tomahawk?
I like Bone Tomahawk. You're right about a lot of it. It starts out kind of slow, and then there's also a lot of different scenes where you're like, what's going on in this scene? Oh, and then it jumps to another scene. You don't know what's going on. Then they kind of meet together. You have to be kind of patient when it starts because there's that going on. I really liked a lot of the characters in this movie. Kurt Russell, of course, he plays his usual, seasoned veteran, no nonsense, stoic character.
Civilized towns. You look a man direct in the face when you talk to him.
But he's a funny character, and he gets stuff done. Jack from Lost, Matthew Fox, was in this, and he was probably the most entertaining character. He was just crazy, but he was like super skilled and had the best gadgets. Probably my favorite part about this movie was just the fact that it was kind of like a weird, almost sci-fi thing. Like there's these people in this town, and then people are starting to get kidnapped by these troglodytes, kind of Indian people, and they have some people in a jail cell, and then those people get kidnapped, but there's an arrow in the jail cell still. So there's a Native American professor in town, and then he goes in, and then he looks at the arrow, and he's like, this isn't any tribe I've ever come across. This is the troglodyte people. They're these inhuman people.
You know who did this?
They don't have a name.
How many of them do you think there are?
It won't matter. You have no chance against any number of them.
And so it's almost like a monster movie like that, but they do a really good job of keeping everything creepy and scary. It does get like pretty gory. I wouldn't recommend this movie if you get queasy with kind of gory scenes because it gets intense. I would say my biggest, if I were to have a big problem with this movie, is that you could just call it a guy with a hurt leg, because there's this guy, the first scene, he's getting his leg treated, and then just the rest of the movie, everything they do, all the characters have to overcome this guy and his hurt leg. They have to walk really far one time, and then there's a bunch of arguments. Oh, you can make it, you can't make it. And it was just like, all right, like, he has a hurt leg, we get it. Let's focus on the movie. I want to see these weird troglodyte people. I want to see them. And then it's just more dialogue about the guy's leg. But overall, like, this movie was cool. I'm glad you recommended it. And if you're into kind of zombie movies, westerns, this is kind of a good mix of both of those. If I were to give it out of 10 review, I would say a 7 out of 10.
Nice. And this movie had a budget of $1.8 million. And you could kind of tell probably now that you heard that.
No, I feel like they kept everything small town, like with a western town like that. Everything's old and crappy, so it's really all you need is good set design out in the desert. And then, you do end up seeing the bad guys, these troglodyte people, and they're scary, but you can tell like their makeup. I'd say the most expensive part is probably just the gory, gruesome parts. With the practical effects, that probably took a lot of work. Before that small of a budget, this movie has a lot of stars in it. Yeah, it has Kurt Russell, it has Patrick Wilson, Jack from Lost, like I mentioned, and then also Richard Jenkins from The Shape of Water.
And did you like his character? I feel like in this movie, they were setting him up to be the guy who dies. He's the oldest guy. He's like, well, now that my wife's gone, there's nothing to live for.
You could tell he was a comic relief in it because Kurt Russell's the sheriff, and then Richard Jenkins is one of the deputies, so he's kind of his servant. And then whenever he has an opinion on something, he's always like, it is the official opinion of the deputy sheriff. And then so he says that probably 15 times during the movie, and he says it in silly situations. But that's kind of a running joke of the movie. So he was funny, but then also sometimes his jokes just didn't land. And then there was like a lot of this movie I noticed had a lot of those scenes where the last line of dialogue is like a joke. Like there's one scene where they're talking about the troglodytes, and then they need to send a telegram to nearby towns to get help. And at the end of the scene, the mayor's like,
Does anybody know how to spell troglodytes?
With the telegram.
and then the scene just ends. So they're kind of those like corny jokes were in it. But yeah, they definitely tried to have humor, and it worked probably half the time.
Yeah. So let's say they cut down the movie a little bit. It wasn't as slow. Maybe got rid of some of the jokes. You probably would have liked it a lot more. Sounds like.
Yeah, you could have probably taken 30 minutes out of it, and it would have been a lot better movie.
And then you recommended Hot Fuzz to me. Can you tell us a little bit about that movie?
Hot Fuzz is a British comedy. It's directed by Edgar Wright, and it stars Simon Pegg and the usual British cast that comes along with him. The same people made Shaun of the Dead and The World's End. I really like Shaun of the Dead. I wasn't a huge fan of The World's End, but Hot Fuzz is definitely my favorite from this group of people. Just some exposition on the movie. Simon Pegg is a straight-out arrow, by the book, 100% dedicated police officer in London. He's so over the top that after rising the ranks in London, his colleagues decided that he's making them look bad because he's working too hard. They decide to send him to a remote village in rural England.
Your arrest record is 400% higher than any other officer. We're making you sergeant.
I see.
In Sanford, Gloucestershire.
In where, sorry?
In Sanford, Gloucestershire.
That's in the country.
Yes! Lovely.
Isn't there a sergeant's position here in London?
No.
Can I remain here as a PC?
No.
Do I have any choice in this?
No.
And keep in mind, this is a comedy. So he's in this little town. It's got cobblestone paths, typical British village. And he finds out that the cops in this town, compared to London, are way lazier. And their conduct is horrible. The first day he's in the town, he sees a guy getting into his car and driving it completely drunk. So he grabs him, arrests him, and then he takes him to the jail, and he finds out that guy is his police partner he's going to have. So that just sort of sets the tone for Simon Pegg now working in this small town. Cody, what did you think of Hot Fuzz?
So I've been on a little bit of like an art film kick lately. So I've been watching as many pretentious movies as I can. And maybe that's why I was in a weird mood for this one. I was expecting to watch some cinema when I hear of a recommendation from you.
What?
I didn't really get any cinema. I got a lot of campy, jokes and stuff. And I love British camp usually. I just maybe wasn't in the mood for it when I watched this movie. I was very disappointed and didn't really find any of the jokes funny. I mean, first of all, off the bat, I didn't buy Simon Pegg as an action hero. Now, maybe that's part of what's so funny. It's part of the allure of this movie is that, oh, look, it's Simon Pegg playing like a leading man. But I just didn't buy it.
Wouldn't you say Simon Pegg is an action hero in the Mission Impossible movies?
No, he's the guy in the chair. He's the guy who helps him out, who hacks the computer. He's not a leading action man. The humor was a little too obvious and sometimes a little too juvenile. We've heard a lot of the jokes before in other movies. I did chuckle at a few parts. I liked him correcting people to say police officer instead of policeman. I thought that was a really good way to show what his character was and also make a joke. But I don't know. I don't really see much new in this movie. I've seen a million buddy cop movies, two funny guys teaming up. You got the skinny guy and the fat guy, and they're like the team. We've just seen it so many times, and this was kind of just another one of those. It was British, so it had that going for it. But it was just disappointing to see Edgar Wright making something so derivative. He usually does something completely different. He'll go in a different direction with his movies. Like Baby Driver was very different from your traditional action movie because he had the whole music element and the idea of, having that specific driving skill, which we hadn't seen very often in one of those types of action movies. I thought that was good. And even Shaun of the Dead was fairly original, even though it was sort of a parody of the zombie movie. And I feel like this was trying to be a parody of the buddy cop movie, but it couldn't decide if it wanted to be a parody or if it wanted to be a movie that should be taken seriously with good comedy in it. Overall, I think it, maybe 6 out of 10. It was barely entertaining enough to hold my attention, but not really good enough to where I would recommend it to someone else to watch.
I don't know. Maybe I'm a little biased because I like anything in like a London British setting. I like, and this movie had a lot of like kind of those small village scenes and stuff. But I think you're underselling the jokes a little bit. I rewatched it after I recommended it to you, and I was laughing out loud like probably 70 times. This movie almost reminds me of the movie Airplane, also like campy humor, where there's like a joke, like every scene, there's like 4 jokes in it. It's just, they don't hold anything back, and like every piece of dialogue is like a pun or it's referencing something. And so one of my favorite jokes is when Simon Pegg, being the police officer, he walks into a bar and then he realizes that all the guests in the bar are teenagers. And then so he just like freaks out, and then you get like a witty British comment from one of the kids.
When's your birthday?
22nd of February.
What year?
Every year. Get out.
Hey! When's your birthday?
8th of May, 1969.
You're 37.
Yeah.
Get out.
Maybe you just need to appreciate British culture more.
Like, it happened to be British. I don't think it had anything in there that was uniquely British. Like, some of the dialogue was British, and had some of that, I don't know, ironic humor, the like deadpan humor. And that was good to see, but I don't know. I think The Office is funnier, the British Office.
All right, I can see what you're saying. If you're not into the comedy, it's like most comedies. If you're not into the jokes, you're not going to like it. If you go see a horror movie, if you just don't think it's scary, you're not going to like the movie. And maybe it just wasn't for you. But appreciate the honest review. So, Cody, we went over these reviews. What are our recommendations for the next episode?
Well, next week I'm going to have you watch a movie called 45 Years. And this is a beautiful movie. It's very quiet. I don't think you'll find it slow at all, though, because it clips along at a pretty good pace. It's mostly character-driven. In fact, it's all character-driven. There's no action. There's no any of that kind of stuff. But there is suspense. And you'll see what I mean when you watch the movie. I don't want to spoil anything else other than that. I want you to go in completely blind so you can enjoy it. I would say, however, look out for the blue light that appears at certain times. Keep an eye out for that.
All right, so I'll be checking out 45 Years. And Cody, so the movie you're going to be watching, I know this is going to make you really happy. This movie came out in 1957. It's called Paths of Glory. It's a war movie, and war movies are one of my favorite genres, and this is one of my favorite war movies, and it's by Stanley Kubrick, who people say is the best director. Director of 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Shining, Clockwork Orange, all those. And so this is like one of his first ones, and you'll get to learn a little history, and I'm interested to see what you think of this old classic compared to all your other favorite movies that came out during this time.
All right. Well, that sounds like a good combination, and I've actually been meaning to check that one out for a while. So looking forward to watching that. And to the folks at home, we appreciate you listening. Sorry we've been on hiatus for a little while. We're going to try to get back on a regular schedule. But make sure to check out the movies we talked about this time or the movies we'll talk about next time.
Yeah, everybody, thanks for listening. Our goal is to provide you with movie knowledge. And so let's say you're driving in the car right now. You got a 2-hour gap. You want to watch a movie. We want to save you that 12 to 20 minutes you spend looking for a movie, and maybe go with one of our recommendations if you want to. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and then we'll have you guys back, and we look forward to seeing you next episode.